All right, let's make this work. So I'd like to basically start this off by welcoming Anne Seymour, who, as you'll see in her bio, is a longtime advocate for people who've been victimized by crime, and also someone who's quite has a specialty in restorative justice, among other things. And Anne graciously agreed to present to us tonight. I had actually heard her in a in a conference a couple weeks ago, and I thought, oh, let me see if she'll talk with us. And she happens to be across the river in Washington, and not that it matters at this point, but we definitely want to welcome Anne, and she's going to share with us some. We're going to do a little differently than some of the other times when we've had guests. Rather than take the time to do a whole round after she speaks for a while to collect up questions, I'm going to invite you all to drop questions in the chat as they occur to you, or at the end of when she's talking, or whatever. And I will try to moderate and make sure that we address your questions in the chat. If anybody's having an issue with that, and you want to, when we get to the Q&A time and you need to ask your question verbally instead of the chat, I know tech and all those things make that possible, not always easy. We'll allow for that as well. So with that, I want to go ahead and toss it over to Anne. And Anne, do you want me to share the document on screen now, or it's up to you?
Whatever you're comfortable with. There's only 6 values, so
all right.
I don't know if people are oral or visual or kinesthetic, so it's up to y'all.
Okay, so I sent to you all the 6 points that Anne is going to talk about in this early part, so you have that somehow. And I'm kind of feeling like I'd rather see you. So if is there anybody who really feels like you want those points up on the screen? Or? Okay, we're just going to we'll keep it moving, and you can look at the points in the document then. All right, thank you, Anne.
Well, thank you all for having me. I actually, when I moved to DC in 1992, I started my career across the street from the Arlington County Center with the National Center for Victims of Crime. So y'all are in my neighborhood and my heart, because that's what brought me to DC from Texas. I want to also thank you for starting with the circle, which is really meaningful to all of us, but with the beautiful poem, because I could not articulate more what victims are all about: truth, light, worth, and courage. And I just want that to be a theme, if you all will, for tonight. And Leanne, I would love a copy of that poem to share with my listserv, because it really moved me. So we met, was it 2 weeks ago? I know it was before the election. It's like before election, after election, at the Catholic Mobilizing Network that I've been involved with for a long time. And we did a really robust and hopefully inspiring session, really focused on the victim piece of restorative justice. And I want to give a shout out to Dr. Sandra Pavelka, who is my co-author on the 6 principles that I'm going to talk about tonight. And just a little bit of background. I'm grounded 36, it's just a whole bunch of years as a victim advocate. And middle of the 1990s, really, I learned about restorative justice, and it, my life changed. It was a life-altering experience. I'm also someone who has had several justice-involved individuals in my family, and many in my life. And so for me, restorative justice has helped me kind of really respect and reflect on the balance that's needed between crime survivors and people who cause harm, and communities who I hopefully want to embrace and provide support to both of them, so that we have less crime and we have support not only for survivors, but for people who want to return to the community and have really healthy, good lives. And that's, to me, is what restorative justice is about. So Dr. Sandy and I came up with 6 guiding principles to be survivor centered with restorative justice. And Leanne, I'd like to kind of go quickly through them. I want to share my stuff with y'all, but I feel it's really important. The benefit to me from hearing from y'all is equally important. So I hope that's okay. I tend to talk quickly. It's the Italian in me. So someone just tell me to slow down if I'm moving too fast. So the first principle I'm going to give you a little background on. Back in 1996, the Department of Justice decided that restorative justice was a good thing. And the National Institute of Corrections did. We thought it would be a little webcast kind of on the, the basics of restorative justice, literally a boot camp on principles and practices. We ended up having 20,000 people in United States, Mexico, and Canada. And it was beyond what any of us expected. And I say that because we came up with 7 principles. That's almost 25 years ago. And the one that stuck with me is the first one. That was the first one on our slides back in 1996. And that is simply that crime is personal. And y'all are, you're justice and survivor warriors, and I appreciate that. But most people think about stranger danger when they think about crime. While the Justice Department tells us that about 2/3 of victims of violent crime are harmed by someone they know. And since crime is personal, restorative justice, and I think more than criminal justice opinion, they allow for responses that are also personal, that identify the victim's needs and wishes, and don't just consider them as a witness to help resolve a case. And a lot of people want to get the conviction. It's really to identify and focus on their needs, and to recognize and validate to them that those personal relationships after a crime have been harmed, and sometimes in very devastating ways. And the other thing, and we had a great discussion, Leanne, at our session, whenever possible, to offer restorative justice as a personal response to what is a deeply personal crime. And I'm going to give you opinions tonight, so I'm just going to go opinion. For a lot of survivors, not all, but a lot of them, the justice system is A, scary, B, extremely impersonal, and C, sometimes it can be very traumatizing. And when we're talking about restorative justice, we just have to think about how we can make the victim feel most comfortable. And also to be able to explain what's the difference between the criminal and juvenile justice system, which is very formal, and restorative justice, which is, I think, much less informal and therefore less threatening. The second principle we believe is that restorative justice must be victim-centered, and it must be trauma-informed. And I go way back, and I told a story at our seminar a couple weeks ago of I became the RJ victim lady for a long time. So I was getting lots of calls and faxes. That's how long ago this was. About well-intentioned restorative justice practitioners. In one state, they went pounding on the doors of victims saying that the person who harmed you wants to meet with you. So please join us for a victim offender. It was called mediation back then. Now imagine being a victim, answering your door, this is physical, and having that shoved in your face. And I was traumatized hearing about it. And I just kept thinking how victims must have felt, sort of being sucked into that process that they didn't know what it was. And they were sort of a means to the end, because we wanted to help and well-intentioned the person who caused harm. That's no longer, I think, hopefully in most places, but we have to really be survivor-centered, and we have to know about the impact of trauma. And I'm not going to preach to the choir and give you all my little PowerPoint on that. I'm going to give you my brief thing is that crime causes great trauma to victims, and it sometimes affects their capacity to report crimes, to participate, to know what's going on, to understand what's going on. And being trauma informed means meeting the victim where they are, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. But also it means recognizing that trauma will change how they view the world, how they think about things, including their own lives, their own case, and most important, about what justice means to them. So I encourage the being trauma informed is super important part of that. Number three, I think y'all covered in the poem so beautifully. The voices of survivors in restorative justice are integral to its effectiveness and to its overall success. And for victims, it does take a lot of courage for them to want to be involved, to be willing, or to have the capacity. It's more to have the capacity to speak, because willingness is sometimes set aside just by the level of trauma. And by their capacity and then desire, if we're doing things right, to engage with the person who harmed them and to engage with the community. And I don't have to tell you all about facing the person who harmed you is disconcerting to a lot of people. I think also facing the community that's traditionally blamed and shamed and judged victims is really, really scary for them. And the difference in a restorative justice practice, whether it's conferencing or dialogue or circles, victim awareness classes, is that people aren't judging them and they aren't blaming them, and they are honoring their truth, their light, their worth, and their courage. I'm stealing from that poem that I will be for the rest of my life. And so making sure that victims know that their voice has power, because when you're victimized, you don't have a sense of control over your life, over that moment, but over your life afterwards. And my goal as a victim advocate, the only thing I do is to try to give victims a sense of control over whatever they need control of in their life. And one of the reasons I love restorative justice is I think it offers more opportunities for victims to gain that control than traditional justice processes, where the control belongs to the justice system, if I may be so blunt. Number four is probably, it's the one that Sandy and I like, it almost didn't make it, but I sort of insisted. And that is that victim autonomy must be central to all restorative justice policies and practices. And what we call survivors' voices and choices, they are the bricks and mortar, to me, of everything that restorative justice is about. The challenge that we as practitioners face is that we need to help them understand what restorative justice is. Restorative is a weird word. Sorry, that's opinion. Advocacy, victim advocacy, weird word too. So I spend my life explaining weird words to survivors. That's just part of what I do. But autonomy is, for victims, it's saying that we will respect your choices and reflect your wishes. Respect and reflect in everything we do. We have to recognize that there will be victims who make choices, their autonomy, that we disagree with. For a lot of victim advocates, it's like, why don't you report the crime? And in my mind, I'm like, I totally get why you're not reporting the crime. There's so many barriers that are systemic and racial and gender-based and economic and all the other challenges that they face. But helping them to understand how restorative justice is different. And if it's a diversion from the justice system, it's one of the hardest things to explain to victims what diversion means. That, going through, you all are legal, technical, I don't have to explain it to you, but you have to be able to explain that to survivors in a way that they are able to understand it. And the other thing with autonomy is that, for me, and I have been the cheerleader on this for 25 years, I believe in my heart and my brain and my mind that restorative justice empowers them and is really something that can help them, again, regain that sense of control over their lives and over their cases. And the two words I really want you to write down, if you're if you're writing people, is what we talked a lot about at the Catholic Mobilizing Network. It's my mantra for victims, and that is we have to offer them options. And then when they choose options, and we don't lead them to the options, we just lay them out there. Here are the options: restorative justice, conferencing, media, it's all an option. And when they make a choice, again, don't be judgy, don't second guess anyone. Look at the options they choose and then build. I think of it as a tree, and nothing grows from the top down. So it's really from the roots of our community. What are the opportunities we can offer them that fulfill the options that they choose? And I know many of you have gone into restorative justice practices where the victim wants, they just want things, that their sense of justice is for them to feel like their life can be changed. They might want a long sentence, they might want restitution, they might want a lot of things. It's helping them understand the opportunities they have that involve things like community service, involve things like, especially in the juvenile justice system, for the kid to complete school, for the kid to be able to do meaningful service, not picking up trash, sorry, Arlington County, but meaningful service that maybe the victim can have a voice in choosing what that community service is. And that's the hardest thing of restorative justice. Once a survivor chooses the option, we have to think about and really have structure to the opportunities that are available to fulfill their choices. The other thing about victim autonomy is that there are some victims who they can't do it. Restorative justice is not an option they choose. And for me, it's important to still be able to offer that option to people who cause harm. And so if a survivor isn't able to participate in a restorative practice, I think it's really important that we think about having surrogate survivors. And I have served as one several times, who can participate in the process and provide, again, the unique perspective that only crime victims have. And at the webinar with Catholic Mobilizing Network, one of the questions was, we can't get victims to join our program, and so we're just relying on surrogates. And my answer was probably a little bit rude, but I was like, call me, you're doing something wrong. If victims aren't comfortable joining in your practice, there's not something wrong with the victim, there's something wrong with your practice. And I should not laugh at that. I'm exhausted, so pardon that, but it's really being able to offer surrogates, but recognize that if you become surrogate reliant, that becomes a sort of a tangential restorative justice, and that we really need to self-examine our policies, again, these are guiding principles, and our practices, and try to figure out how we can be more welcoming to survivors. And I say the same thing for people who cause harm. I say the same thing for community members who we try to engage in circles and so on. Okay, the fifth practice is, if restorative justice fails to respect and reflect victims' constitutional and statutory rights, it's not restorative. And the criminal and juvenile justice system in our country, we have over 32,000, I think it's probably upward of 40,000 laws that define and protect victims' rights. And y'all are aware of most of them, notification, information, victim compensation, restitution, being able to do a victim impact statement. We, and Dr. Sandy and I have started examining this, we need to look at sort of moving the statutory and constitutional rights to a restorative model, where the victim impact statement becomes speaking to the person who harmed you, that restitution becomes part of the case plan, that notification, when you have a restorative justice outcome or case plan, that the victim is kept in the loop about what's going on. And so it's taken these 32,000 or 40,000 very formal laws and saying, how can we massage these to be part of restorative justice? And then I asked the radical question, and I've gotten a few responses. And I'm retiring in 3 years, so I'm in a big hurry to fix things. I asked the question, and I would like to talk to you all about this, because it is a statutory thing. Should there be a right, a statutory right for crime survivors to participate in restorative justice? It doesn't exist right now. It exists in a lot of agency policies. It exists in some funding opportunities with VOCA, where VOCA funds are going into restorative justice practices. For me, I mean, one of my last hurrahs on the way out would be to statutorily make it possible for victims to say, I don't want door number 1, I want door number 2 or 3. No one has that. It's probably a really insane idea. But again, I'm feeling like insanity right now is a good thing in my head. I don't know about you all. So I'm going to say that again. Should there be a right for survivors to choose to participate in restorative practices versus traditional criminal or juvenile justice practices? And our big finish, and it's number 6, but it's not 6th most important. It's so critical. And that is, it's my experience, but also tons of data to back it up, is that many justice involved individuals, and some would say most, including youth, women, and men, have histories of trauma and victimization that can be addressed and validated within a restorative justice framework. And I will tell you, about maybe 20 years ago, I started doing victim awareness classes in prisons with, I mean, sometimes with lifers, people who would never literally see the light of day, most often in the adult system with people who had committed serious violent crimes. And in the juvenile justice system, 100%, it was no question about trauma and victimization histories. And it took me 20 years and doing a lot of justice reform work over the last 10 years, spending time in states like Oklahoma, which has the highest rate of women who are incarcerated in the country. And I feel like 100% of those women have not just acute victimization, they have chronic victimization histories. And so, and that's been a sea change in the victim field, is that we recognize if we're going to change the world as we all want to, we have to recognize victim trauma among those who cause harm. And as I said in the webinar, it's not an excuse for their causing harm, but it's a mitigating factor that we have to really try to look at and understand it as their pathway to the justice system was being a victim. And I have had people argue with me until they were blue in the face, and guess who won? I will stand on that till the day I die. I just feel if we are going to talk about crime prevention and successful reentry and being victim and trauma informed, we must recognize the fact that folks who are sitting in prisons, juvenile detention centers, on probation and parole, community corrections, we have to be victim-centered and trauma-informed with them as well. So those are my, Dr. Sandy, and my 6 principles. I wanted to be quick because I do want to hear from you. I know you've probably heard versions of these principles or values before, because we stole a couple from the 1996. I have no shame. I steal good stuff. We stole from 25 years ago, but built on our 25 years of experience. So, Leanne, I don't know how you facilitate chit chat about this, but that's kind of my shtick.
All right. Thank you so much, Anne. I see. So what I'm going to do is I'll sort of moderate questions. I see that Bob has put a question in the chat. I invite other people to put their questions in the chat or speak up when there's a moment. So Bob's question is, if victims don't want to participate and surrogates do, Does the victim find out what happened at the end of the restorative process?
That, Bob, is such a good question. Part of being victim-centered would be the victim says, that's not for me. If we decide to go forward with it, it's really important to notify them that the person who harmed you really wants to go through this process. We want to all go through this process with them to hopefully change behavior, promote accountability, and everything, all the purposes of why we do restorative justice. And one of the options for victims is, do you want to be notified about the case outcome? And if they say yes, we notify them about the case option, which opens up, what's the other word? Opportunities. At that point, when you have a case plan and the person who caused harm commits to certain things, and the victim wants to hear about it, God bless you for letting them know and making that option available to them. And the reason I love that question is people, when you use a surrogate, they go, okay, bye-bye, victim. And so you're kind of off the chart. They shouldn't be off the chart. They can tell you, I want to be off the chart. It's not our decision. It's their decision. So I would just say keep engaging them as much as you can until they don't want to. That's their choice.
Great. I'm going to skip Candace's question for a second because Jen also talks about surrogates. So while we're on the theme of surrogates, I'll come back to your question, Candace. Jen asked, can you speak to situations where surrogate victims might be used for cases for young juvenile victims who may have, difficulty participating, or animals?
Yeah, no, that's actually another really good question. With juvenile victims, it's, well, depending on if it's a school set, it depends on the setting where it occurred. That's a choice of the parents or the protectors of the juvenile to have them participate. I'm preaching to the choir, but there's a lot of preparation that goes into that, unless it's like a school situation, which is a little bit more informal. With animal abuse, that's something I will tell you, the ASPCA are some of the best people who can talk about that level of harm, but also understand the trauma of the child who caused harm that was a factor in their decision or their capacity to harm an animal. And so the answer is you're looking to adults when there are child victims or teen victims to help make that decision. And again, that's part of like sort of engaging, informing, educating, and engaging to the degree that they have the capacity to engage.
So just quick follow-up. So has the ASPCA said been part of doing this that you know of?
They have, and I don't want to name states, Leanne, but if you follow up with me, not tomorrow, but like Wednesday, again, I get threads of stuff all the time from around the country. And I'm going to give you another tip. I don't know if you all know the Association for Prosecuting Attorneys. It's sort of the Progressive DAs Association. They do specialty work on animal harm. And I would just send you to their website because that's a big part of what they do. And I'm happy to follow up with information about that for you. And then, another surrogate, a lot of people have had their animals harmed. Is someone else whose dog or cat or goat, whatever, has suffered harm at the hands of an individual, to be able to use them in cases like that.
Okay. Now I'm coming back to Candace's question about any considerations you'd want us to think about when considering restorative justice for intimate partner and sexual violence.
Yeah, I'm actually working with New Jersey right now, is looking to kind of take that on statewide with really strong support from the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Coalition. I would refer you all to David Karp. He runs the Restorative Justice Listserv. And Leanne, when this is done, I'm going to give you a one-pager Word document. David's he and I co-authored book on the death penalty and victims, and we've been together just, I think, mentally and emotionally for many, many years. He focuses a lot now on restorative justice in sexual assault and intimate partner violence cases. I've been the one that's had qualms about it, and I'm going to tell you why, and maybe we can chat about this. And particularly in intimate partner cases, the degree and level of the power and control that the abuser has over the victim is overwhelming, and in some cases insurmountable. And it takes a really special RJ facilitator to know that, validate it, expect that it's coming, and not be manipulated by these people, because they can be extremely manipulative. And so my whole, and I do have mixed feelings. My concern is that the victim will not have the safety and protection that he or she needs, just as they didn't have it when they were being abused. And so it's just a question of finding and creating and guaranteeing, and I strongly use that word, all of you, guaranteeing a safe place where the victim can speak without, the raised eyebrow or the finger on the ear or whatever signal has been used chronically to let them know that they're in big trouble by the person who harmed them. To be able to create a safe environment is really, really important. Are people doing it? Yes, they are. I read the research. I follow David's listserv. It's probably my most robust listserv, and there are a lot of people committed to this. Am I 100% convinced that it's a good idea? I'm not. I'm being really honest with y'all. But Dr. Mary Koss in Arizona just published a report maybe 2 months ago about sexual assault and restorative justice having great success in Arizona. There are just pockets of really successful and evaluated programs. And so what I do is I keep reading the research, praying, because I'm a prayerful person. And I've been convinced more over the past 3 or 4 years. I was the don't do it, absolutely adamant victim advocate, quite outspoken, so I made a lot of people's lives miserable. I'm now more open to it. I would encourage you, and I'll load you up with a few of the research reports, to read the research and to see what makes these programs effective. And my Cliff Notes version is focused on victim safety, where the victim feels safe. I'm going to tell you, I'm on True Confessions. I'm on the board of the Clery Center, Security on Campus, that was responsible for the passage of the Clery Act. When Jeannie Clery was murdered, I was actually the victim advocate for her parents, Howard and Connie Clery. And restorative justice is really successfully being used on college campuses. And Arlington, across the river, how many college campuses do we have in the DMV? I mean, if it's not like 50 or a zillion. And the reason it's being successful is going through the campus judicial system. The only thing worse than the criminal justice system is the campus system, where you have, other students judging you. I mean, it's just a horrible, horrible process. So I've been really open as a member of the Clery board and looking at the research on the effectiveness on college campuses, where the cases that are restorative justice cases on college campuses, about 100% of them, the people know each other. So again, I'm going back to principle number 1, crime is personal. And the other thing is that they are so survivor centric, and the campus community, instead of being gossipy and judgy and nasty, and they really do wrap the survivor and the alleged abuser in a circle of kind of hope and understanding and trying to reach resolution. So if it's an improvement over traditional justice processes, I'm all for it. I just have to say I'm all for it. Sorry, I babbled on there. I'm so sorry, but you just struck a nerve because I was really opposed to it for a long time, and I'm becoming fluid and flexible in my old age.
All right, we want you to be talking to us, so that's the whole point. So we're good. I'm going to come to Parissa's question in a moment, but two quick things. So Michael wanted to know the name of the book, I guess, with David Karp. Was that it, Michael? That you wrote? Yeah.
It's, I can find it literally right now. And Michael, I'm going to actually do so it's Wounds That Do Not Bind. But I know Leanne is taking good notes. I always follow up with a 1 or 2 pager with Mary Koss research, references. I mean, that's my thank you to you all for having me. This was I edited it and wrote chapters that was specific to victims, but it gave perspectives of I all over the map on victims and death penalty, with a little restorative justice flavor in between.
Great. So Bob has a follow-up, and then I'll get to Parissa's question and then Michael's question. Bob, do you want to go ahead and unmute? You said you wanted to ask the follow-up in person.
I didn't know what the right words were, so I didn't want to make typos and that kind of stuff. So if I understood you correctly, I asked the question earlier about do victims find out when surrogates are involved? You said yes. And I'm trying to make the distinction between they find out, for example, what the opportunities are that are being offered. Do they have input into additional opportunities, or do they have input into saying that does not work for me?
Yeah. Thank you, Bob. And I need to correct myself. They're not really being offered that option. If a victim says no and we decide to go with the surrogate, as we often do, most programs just cut the victim out. So that's a policy fix that we need to focus on. My suggestion is that if we get a surrogate, that we inform the victim that in order to engage the person who harmed you, and the community is here to provide support, we have a surrogate of a similar type of crime or whatever type of crime. We're going to go through with a conference or a dialogue or a circle. And out of this comes a case plan. You have the option of us informing you about the outcome and any decisions related to the case plan. Do you want us to inform you of that? You're giving them the option. If they say yeah, if they say no, you're done. You're just done. Or refer them, make sure they have a victim advocate to help them. If they say yes, the opportunity at the end of the case plan is to inform them about what's going on, keep them informed about the case, and continue, if they want the option, to meet with the person who harmed them. After there's been a surrogate, that becomes a whole new thing. But that's not happening. That's Annie's dream.
Yeah, but what I'm pushing back on, or not pushing back, I'm trying to understand. If I say I don't want to participate, and you then tell me what the plan is, and somehow I don't feel good about that plan.
Yeah. So
have I kind of, I said I didn't want to participate, but now I'm participating.
No, so if you say you don't want to participate and we're going to go ahead with the surrogate, you give the victim the choice that we're doing this, and well written, explaining why, because the community's there, the person who harmed you is there, they want it, and we respect that you don't. So we're going to do this, and your option is, do you want to know what happens? So again, it's all about their autonomy and choice. They can say, yeah, they can say yes, I don't know, can I get back to you? I mean, I just it's again giving them that option, and we're not doing that systematically. I don't know if I'm being clear. I'm sorry, Bob.
That's why I wanted to talk, because yes, I understand you give them the option to find out what the status is, what the plan is, whether the offender or harm doer carried through. I understand that.
Yeah.
But do they then be able to, when they find out what the plan is, do they have the opportunity to jump back in and say, that plan doesn't work? Here's my idea.
So if they say, that's such a great example. If they don't like the plan and they have an idea, then the invitation to participate in a circle, a conference, a dialogue is again extended.
Okay.
I mean, I wouldn't let a victim say, knowing the work that goes through that outcome, to say, I don't like it, I disagree with it, it's bad. I would talk to them about concerns they have. You have confidentiality issues, so you have to be very careful. And by the way, if you're going to share the case plan with the victim, that has to be approved by the person who caused harm. Thank you for reminding me of that. I wouldn't just let them complain about the outcome. I would give them the opportunity to discuss. I mean, that's a great opportunity to say, what outcome would you like to see? What would be more amenable to you and the trauma you suffered and the harm that was caused you? And that's opening up, Bob, that's a huge door. That's a door right there, like getting them to think about what they would have done had they participated in the restorative justice practice, which I'm now recognizing the irony of that. Again, it's just opening a door for them. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That was a really good question. You're getting me thinking.
We have actually a couple more questions that are on the theme of surrogates. I'm just going to kind of put two of them together. One is a question about, is there a way to gauge how effective the use of a surrogate was? And then the other is, how do you respond if the victim feels harmed by the proceeding with a surrogate, feeling that their voice remains unheard or not respected?
So a whole other sidebar to this discussion that Dr. Sandy and we've been working with conferencing in Tennessee and in Miami-Dade, Florida, is we have created a victim's needs assessment with a matching satisfaction survey at the end. And I say that to you because we have to measure the impact of what we do on victims and the effectiveness of the overall restorative justice process. If a victim chooses, and I hate to use that word because it's not a choice when you're traumatized, it's just an action you take. If they are unable to participate in the process, we still need to be able to measure the success of using a surrogate. And I don't know that anyone's done this. You all are giving me so many ideas, and I retire in 3 years, so I got to really hurry up on this. Do the people who participated think there was a difference because it wasn't the actual victim? I don't know that that's ever been measured, and it's something that should be measured. And I see Leanne taking notes, and I'm talking. I want all your notes because my side passion is program evaluation, and I think that's something that's really, really important. I know I can speak from experience. When I've participated as a surrogate, and again with proper case planning, I go in. Everyone knows I'm a victim advocate, but I also go in from personal experiences that are pretty matched to the case experience. And I think that's really important, that we don't have just rando surrogates, that we have someone, and I like what you all were saying earlier, like about animal harm, having someone who's been through that experience. And so being able to, as part of the planning process, get a surrogate who's as close to the actual harm that occurred as the reality of how that happened. And I think that's really important. And I do have, it's still in the process, we're evaluating our evaluation, but I do have a sample victim needs assessment / evaluation at the end survey. It's for juvenile justice. It's being tested, but I'm happy to share a draft with you all. And I'm sorry I got into evaluation. You get me on that, and I'm like, I could talk for days. But I think we have to be able to assess the difference between an actual victim and a surrogate. Nobody has done that I know of, but Leanne's going to send me her notes, and I'm going to do a shout out this week. And I will get back to my cross the river new friends, specifically on that, because I'm intrigued by that. I really am.
Great, thanks. Now I'm going to bundle up a couple of questions we have about talking with victims. Parissa notes that her office, she's the Commonwealth attorney, has started conducting victim listening sessions to make sure we've incorporated the voices of victims in fashioning the program. So she wants advice on how best to conduct those, and also asked if there are resources to learn how to speak to harm parties to help lay the options out for them.
Yeah. Oh my God. I've always loved the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. We worked very closely with you all when I first came here like 25 years ago. And so thank you for doing that. Leanne knows in the seminar we did, the national seminar we did, my joke is, it's not a joke, but how do you find out what victims need? And the answer is you ask them. And the fact that y'all are doing listening sessions is, it's just really, really important, because when victims go through the justice process, even with, I know you have good prosecutors, I've worked with them before, the justice system is super impersonal. So bringing victims in for a listening session to say, you know, you went through that process, and of course you want to know how the process was for them, but you're asking them personally, not to be a witness. You're asking them to speak truth, bring light, have worth, and show courage. I'm going back to that beautiful poem. You're validating their experiences as people who are harmed by crime, not as witnesses in a box. And that's the biggest difference. And I will tell you, we did this in Tarrant. I was in Texas for a while in Tarrant County. Like, when you ask victims from the system to come in and talk to you, most of them say no because they're terrified. But when they understand that it's a safe place and a respectful dialogue, and you want to hear from them about them, I can't tell you that there's anything more validating to a survivor than having someone in the system doing this in a process where it's just the opposite of the criminal justice system. So I say kudos to you on that. I teach on communicating with victims. I'm happy to come over, and I haven't been to Arlington County Courthouse in a long time, so I might have a little PTSD, but y'all can make me feel safe. I'm happy to come over and like physically 6 feet apart. I'm happy to visit with you on that, because that's one of the things that I've done for years, and having the system initiate that, I just say go Arlington County, because it's just really, really important what you're doing. I'm going to start to get emotional because most systems don't do it. And I have a PowerPoint, Leanne, write it down, on just communicating with victims. I have a PowerPoint on the language of restorative justice, because we don't use words like closure, and we don't use words like forgiveness. If a victim uses them, they're fine. But there's a lot of language issues that victims find very intimidating. So I'm happy to share those with you. Yeah. And come across the river, hang out in Arlington County.
All right.
Is Summer still there? The little coffee shop right on the corner? Wilson Boulevard?
Yes, it is.
Okay, that was our hangout.
Closing.
Sorry?
Summers?
Yeah.
It's closing.
Oh. So we used to go literally in the middle of the night to watch World Cup soccer. They would have World Cup soccer at 3 a.m. and we would go to Summers and watch it. So that's my story. I'm sorry to hear that. Thank you for telling me.
Well, you have an open invitation, and I would really love to not only get our victim witness group together, but also to include Najla in the process because Najla is helping and really sort of laying out the groundwork for the work that we're doing with the victim listening.
I'm happy to do that. I've worked for years with Fairfax County, so y'all are in between. So let's do this. Let's make it happen.
Super. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, I will definitely connect you all. Okay, so other questions. Make sure I'm catching them. Okay, so Jen asks, and just so you know, Jen is our chief of animal control. This is why we had these questions about the animal responses. And wants to know if you know of any local law schools in the DMV that have law clinics with RJ components.
Oh boy, not so. The big restorative justice, the big money from Patrick Leahy went to, surprise, Vermont Law School. That was pretty recent. I know that it's taught at University of Maryland because my niece went there. Georgetown and Georgetown Law School, I believe, has dipped into restorative justice. I don't know enough, but the NVRDC here in DC would know that. At George Mason, is that in Arlington County? George
Yes.
Mason. So
Actually,
George
yes.
Mason, I don't know if y'all know, Lori Robinson under President Clinton was the head of the Officer of Justice programs forever. And she's now a professor out at George Mason. When I talked about our 1996, and it was followed by a RJ, we called it the World Tour, it was because of Lori Robinson. And so I would check with George Mason. And Lori, you literally can find her, email her and say, Anne sent you, and she will be happy to chat with you if she's not busy going back to the Justice Department in 72 days. But you know, Leanne, I can get an answer for you by talking to the DC van folks, because we have a lot of RJ stuff going on here in DC that I'm not as involved as I need to be.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, I think I do know that there's been some work going on at Georgetown Law, and we have a great partnership with George Mason. They're what was formerly the School of Conflict Analysis and Resolution is now the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah. And Candace says Marquette too, and she's dropped a link in here. I'm not quite sure what the link is.
Oh, Marquette in Milwaukee?
Yeah, they're not the DMV. I was just sharing that they do an annual conference.
I'm familiar with their program. And then the University of San Diego, y'all Google Dr. David Karp, K-A-R-P. He's the wounds that do not bind. David moved from upstate New York to University of San Diego. They were the co-sponsors of the CMN conference where Leanne and I met 2 weeks ago. David is the expert on restorative justice on college campuses. And Leanne, I'm sorry, put it on your list. I will inform you all. His listserv, if you don't mind getting like 3 things a day, all 3 of them, well, 2 out of 3 are good. One's usually but it's always really good information, and not just related to college campus. He's really connected to RJ world, and when I say world, I mean internationally. He puts out really good information. So check out David Karp, University of San Diego. Marquette's program, I'm glad you brought that up, is just wonderful. And then Vermont School of Law, they are going to be pumping out really good stuff. I think they got $2 million over 3 years. I could be wrong on the amount. And they're partnering with the National Center on Restorative Justice, which I hope y'all are familiar with. They also put out really good stuff.
All right. I'm double checking. I feel like I've gotten most of the questions.
Y'all have the best questions.
I have a question, Leanne, if you don't mind.
Go for it, Najla.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. It's really, we learned a lot. It's so exciting and refreshing to hear your perspective. You mentioned the measurement and the effectiveness and how you're big in evaluation. And I am a big fan of evaluation, especially when it comes to the RJ. because I guess there is a lot of criticism and there is a lot of pushback when it comes from social science, like, okay, how you measure RJ,
Yeah.
right? Especially when working with victims, and it's a long process, and what's the best way? So I have a lot to say, but I would love just to say in short, what is the best practice from your experience when it comes to the measurement? You mentioned about the system, certification and all that stuff, but based on your experience working with victims, which is ongoing in process and it's a long process, how the best way you can evaluate or measure the effectiveness of RJ?
The work I've been doing in Nashville, Tennessee, and now with soon to be in Miami-Dade. And Miami-Dade is only girls of color, are pretty much the population, both the victims and the people who cause harm. We are testing out an instrument, which I will share with you all. It's in draft form. Draft is really big on it. We decided to not do victim evaluation until we did a victim needs assessment. So up front, we asked the victims a series of questions about their needs. And in restorative justice, it's not just your needs as a traumatized victim, it's your needs for housing and school for your kids, and do you have food? I mean, it goes into the broader Maslow needs, if you will, but it does get into needs that result from victimization. So up front, you do a needs assessment, which helps steer you into the case, the getting ready for there it's conferencing, but also in Nashville, they have this amazing team of victim advocates, both system and community-based, that meet the victims' needs to the degree possible. So we ask them their needs, and the evaluation at the end is, were your needs met based on the needs assessment, but also on the restorative justice process. And I want to give a shout out, if y'all don't know Impact Justice, they did the restorative justice toolkit a couple of years ago. They're my partners in restorative justice crime. We laugh about that. Everything I'm doing on evaluation, I do with them. And so at the end, the evaluation links back to the questions that you asked about victims' needs that literally say, were your needs met? In Davidson County, I'm just going to brag a little bit. Their needs are being met. I mean, the process is just so incredible. But it also takes them through things about how they were treated. Did they feel safe? I wish I was at my other computer. I could pull it up, but I will share it with you. And then one of the things I do, I have funding that just helps me go in and help people on restorative justice. So if you all need a consult, a day or so, just to look at the evaluation piece, the bones of what we did in Davidson County that we're adapting to Miami-Dade because the population is girls of color, which is a little bit more narrow. You could take our bones and adapt it to Arlington County. Are y'all criminal justice and juvenile justice? What's your?
Both.
So the adaptation to criminal justice would be harder because it's written for juvenile justice. But Sandy and I put a year of work, and Dr. Dean Kilpatrick, who's the best evaluator in the victims field, was our little angel on our shoulder. We can share that with you. Leanne's going to put it on the list to send to you, my big old list, and look at it. And it's long, so it'll take you a while to. I always tell people print it out and soak it up because it's very detailed. And then think about how to adapt it to Arlington County. And the funny thing, knowing the demographics of Arlington County, it might not be that different because you're a very culturally diverse county, as is Nashville. And Nashville has a lot of wealth and a lot of absolute no wealth and everything in between. So it might be an easier fit to adapt. Then I always tell people, when you look at the documents, victim needs assessment and then the evaluation satisfaction survey, I've gotten really good input from people like y'all that have helped us adapt it even more as it's being, they're evaluating that whole process down in Davidson County. And by the way, that whole program was VOCA funded, Victims of Crime Act funding. And that's how I got involved in it, because VOCA requires rigorous evaluation. And that's why I'm involved in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. And I'm feeling optimistic that this RJ wave is going to be big. So I'm going to send you all the tool.
Thank you.
And mull it over, and then I'll send you, and y'all can just get back in touch with me. I'd be happy. Really,
Perfect.
I'd be
Thank you
great
so
to
much.
hear your response.
Great, that's awesome. And you just tapped into one of the other questions that that we have, which is about getting VOCA funding. And I understand now the RAFA Institute was able to do that in Tennessee. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right.
Yeah, Rafa.
Rafa, okay. In that Impact Justice project. But we're wondering though, Parissa was wondering, like, how might we get some VOCA funding for RJ?
So are we in the cone of silence? Who's here? Who's on the call?
Who do you need to not be on the call?
Can I be really comfortable telling you this?
I think so.
The VOCA rule that was passed, and
I can. Do you want me to? I can pause the recording if you like.
No.
Okay.
I just, what I'm going to offer you is what I've offered a number of jurisdictions. So the VOCA rule that passed in 2016, I may be off a year, Leanne, but the VOCA rule, for years, VOCA precluded anything to do with offenders, their terminology, not mine. And the VOCA rule made a really big change. And Leanne, if you put that on the list, I've literally took the 100-page document and cut and pasted the 2 pages that matter. So they said that you can use VOCA funding as now allowable for restorative justice. And then it lays out, it's not strict, but it's kind of the measurements that they're looking at. So Tennessee, I can't thank them enough. They were the first state that, when I say went big, Rafa Institute is one of 5 programs they funded. They have dialogue, they have reentry, they have incarcerated women, so they have everything, including the conferencing program. And so the fact that, it's hard to explain this, Tennessee did it, they were big and bold, and then Tennessee and I did a road show at all the national conferences before COVID to packed audiences, and it was Johnny Appleseed, and that's how we got Florida, and that's why I'm spending time in New Jersey, and that's why I've worked in Pennsylvania, and that's why California, despite funding mediation in prisons, is looking to expand. And so every VOCA administrator, this is the cone of silence in Virginia, and you have a good one. They all have their own fiefdoms. I don't know if that's the right word. They are very independent. They have to follow the VOCA rule and not much else. So it's their decision whether or not to fund RJ. So my offer to everyone, and Rafa is fine with this, I send their grant that I help them on. I send their grant application to people who are interested in it, which explains, why we are applying under the VOCA rule, and explains all the measurements that are required under VOCA and so on. Now, the other thing I'm going to tell you is that this administration, OJJDP, had a restorative justice working group. We didn't do much, but it had one. The incoming administration, the commitment to RJ will be, after COVID is dealt with, I think will be strong. Lori Robinson at GMU, my queen, if she's involved at all with the administration, RJ is her passion. And so I think that there will be open doors. Having said that, after Rafa, they finished their 3-year funding and then got 3 years more. It was so successful. And so we haven't been able to do the road show that the VOCA administrator and I did, but people are finding out about it, and they call her, Jennifer Brinkman is her name, and then they call me, and then we're all one big happy family on, yeah, be brave, do this. So it can be done in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It is a decision of your VOCA administrator, but I think it's one that y'all ought to be pitching.
Great, thanks. That's good to know. We National Juvenile Justice Network was one of the groups that had the whole VOCA Road show,
Yeah.
and it was very exciting, and I think that's the key, the golden key right there, is just the reaching out to the administrator, I think.
Yeah, and I did a webinar for them like a year ago,
Mhm.
specifically on VOCA.
Mhm.
It's kind of a new thing. I mean, Rafaz did it for 3 years, but everyone else is like, ooh, it's this new little sparkly thing, restorative justice, and
Mm.
we can make it happen.
Yeah. Candace has a further question about the VOCA. Does applying for VOCA for RJ and other new programs reduce the likelihood that agencies currently relying on VOCA locally could be impacted?
So there's a whole bigger discussion about VOCA is seeing significant cuts, and I don't have, that's a 10-hour conversation. We're working in Congress to mitigate that. Anytime you do funding for RJ, it's taken away from anytime you do funding for any program, you are competing with others. So there's no way to avoid that. My feeling, and if you read the RFA application, which I will send you, is that it's a victim service. So it's not like it's RJ versus victim services. Their program is so much a victim service that's now beloved and embraced by the community. And the one we're building in Dade County with an MOU with the state's attorney of Dade County, if you can believe that, it's a victim service. So it's not apples and oranges, it's just apples, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But my sidebar is where, in the last couple of days, with a new administration coming in, we are really focused on getting increased funding for VOCA and also reauthorizing VAWA. I will just, if any of you are on Twitter, hashtag reauthorize VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act. Who wrote that? Oh, be President-elect Biden. So sidebar.
Yep. And I know actually one of our members in our community working group has been working on the reauthorization and really wants to make sure that RJ is connected with that. So
that's great.
Yeah.
And there is Michael question, maybe.
Yes, I see Michael's question. Do you know of municipalities that began incorporating brand new RJ programs? What obstacles have you seen with these groups getting off the ground?
With municipalities or like cities or counties or?
Michael, you want to?
Sure, yeah, thank you. So as you know, we're in the beginning phases of, hopefully launching our own local RJ program in Arlington. I wonder if you have experience with other groups that have tried getting off the ground, like what has gotten in the way, what's been some of the barriers?
Yeah, so most of the programs, I mean, starting with RFA is not a statewide program. It's in Nashville. It's in Davidson County. Here in DC, if I can be hashtag DC proud, our Attorney General, Carl Racine, are you familiar with his program in SEMA?
We had SEMA as one of our guests.
Yeah, and SEMA's been one, and she was on the webinar with me where she's done the most stellar job of, her program is so reliant and engaging of the community-based victim advocates. So my advice to you is make sure the community's involved. That's just, I always say that the victim is usually the third arm that's left out of restorative justice, but getting community members involved, whether it's shop owners or restaurants or people who work with pets. Now you all have me obsessing over animals, and that's a good thing. That you have representatives of the community. The other thing, and I will tell you, in Miami-Dade, the reason our program moved forward is that there was a MOU between the juvenile court judge, the state's attorney, which is your Commonwealth attorney, the NGO, and then a whole bunch of victim programs to get, and RFA did that in Davidson County too, to get a formal or informal, I don't know how uptight Arlington County is, an agreement on what that looks like. In particular, are y'all looking at diversion programs or system-based or diversion?
So we're probably, we're looking at diversion to start with.
Okay.
We actually, yeah, I'll just say that.
Okay, so I would encourage you to talk to Rafa. And they are, I can refer you to a couple of people there. They're like a perfect example, and very, as I said earlier, relevant to Arlington County in terms of demographics. And I would just get a consult with them because the guy who runs the program is former military, former cop, and a minister. Can you stand that? He just he just checks every box that I love with my heart. And he's just amazing. So I'm happy to make that introduction. And the other thing is, I'm going to be really busy for the next 3 weeks. After that, I'm happy to hop on a Zoom with y'all, or go cross the river and walk around Arlington Cemetery, whatever your choice is, to help you think through some of these issues. I mean, I'm really blessed that I've worked in, not nationally, but in Davidson County, in Miami-Dade. And I feel like I could be really helpful to you as you're looking to establish your roots, and look at the lessons learned from those two communities. And Philadelphia. I've just started working with them, and they're amazing.
Awesome. Yeah. I just actually had a conversation with Jody up in Philadelphia. It's her birthday.
Oh my gosh.
today.
And she's another great mentor for doing the community-based program.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, so Devanshi says, thanks for your presentation. We're implementing, and I think this might end up being our last question because it's coming up on 8 o'clock. So
Okay.
Implementing a community-based program and are expanding our community coalition. We have businesses, faith-based organizations, civic organizations, and she welcomes any additional thoughts.
Victim services. You got to have your rape crisis center. You have a number of domestic violence programs. Your children's advocacy center. Now, Arlington County used to have a couple of small, real survivor initiated and focused NGOs. I don't know if they're still there. And who's our friend from the Commonwealth's attorney, Paritha, you will know the programs. You can't, when I'm going to go back to 2 weeks ago, Seema talked about DC. Why RJ is so good in DC. The first people she called, Leanne, you remember she said, were the victim service providers at the U.S. Attorney's Office, which is your Commonwealth attorney, and then whoosh, cut through all of our local victim service providers. So you can't do it without them. And the other thing is that when you invite them, I've never had a victim NGO not embrace restorative justice. And I've been doing this for a very long time. I'm old and tired. So embrace them all, which is difficult in Zoom times, but do the outreach. It's worth it.
Awesome. That is great. Okay, so in the outreach, any major no-nos? I'll just have that one follow-up.
So I always tell people when you do outreach to victim organizations, go to them. I mean, the option is invite them to you, but offer to go to them, bring cookies and coffee, which we like, and ask them what they know about restorative justice and what they want to learn about restorative justice. And tell them, you can give them the 6 principles, which I co-authored them, but I think they're kind of this is where we want to be, and talk about them, the principles with them, and help them say that we need you to build a successful program. And the way to be unsuccessful is to not invite victims. Seema said that, Leanne, better than I did 2 weeks ago.
Mhm.
She's like, we wouldn't even have thought of doing it in DC without proactively engaging the victim folks. So
yeah. All right. And this has been so great. Thank you so much for your time and generosity and sharing with us. I think I might have gotten to most of the questions. I might have left one off, I suspect, but we're kind of out of time.
No, I follow up with my list, Leanne,
Mhm.
and starting tomorrow at 5, I have a new email, so I'll send that to you. And any of y'all, I'll send you my email and my cell phone. Please reach out to me. And I do go walk at Arlington Cemetery a lot. I kid you not. So if anyone wants to join me on a walk and talk, as we call them, I would welcome that. And thank
Yeah.
you for having me. This is uplifting after a very uplifting week. So.
Great. All right. Thank you so much.
All right,
Um,
y'all. Have a
and
good discussion.
You too. Take care. I mean, have a good evening. All right.